You may not be losing interest in life. You may be outgrowing the version of yourself that needed it to look a certain way. Lately, something subtle has been happening beneath your awareness. Your reactions feel quieter. Your decisions don't follow the old logic that once drove you forward. You release things without the emotional storms you expected. You feel an impulse to reset what you once fought hard to protect. To the surface mind, this can feel strange, even unsettling, as if something essential has gone missing. But what you are experiencing is not a loss. It is the early signal of an initiation that begins long before the world reflects it back to you. What is unfolding is deeply connected to the energetic threshold leading into 2026. In numerology, this is a year one, a year of initiation, identity recalibration, and quantum beginnings. But year one does not start with action. It starts with subtraction. Before a new cycle can form, the old one must complete. Not dramatically, not destructively, but quietly from the inside out. This is why the shift feels internal first. You are not confused. You are not unmotivated. You are not losing direction. You are closing an old energetic agreement with who you used to be. And that completion happens at the level of identity long before life visibly rearranges itself. Most people expect transformation to arrive with chaos. They think rebirth must look like breakdown, crisis, or collapse. But the most profound transformations rarely announce themselves loudly. They begin as a withdrawal of energy. Your nervous system slowly stops feeding patterns that no longer match who you are becoming. Your attention drifts away from timelines that once defined your worth. Your emotional body loosens its grip on roles, relationships, ambitions, and fears that once felt inseparable from your sense of self. Nothing is wrong, something is finishing. This is why 2026 already feels different, even though it hasn't arrived yet. In the quantum field, time does not move in straight lines. Identity shifts first. Reality reorganizes afterward. What you are sensing is not a prediction of the future. It is a preparation for it. The field does not wait for calendar years to initiate change. It begins the moment your internal frequency can no longer sustain the old version of you. And once that threshold is crossed, there is no return to who you were. There is only integration into who you are becoming. Neurologically, this phase often shows up as a loss of interest in dopamine-driven goals. The brain begins to value coherence over stimulation. You may feel less compelled to chase outcomes and more sensitive to what feels aligned or misaligned in your body. Quantum mechanically, this is the moment the observer detaches from an outdated identity. And when that happens, the probabilities linked to that identity begin to collapse. Paths that once felt inevitable quietly dissolve. Spiritually, this phase has always been called the void. Not because nothing exists there, but because nothing has been defined yet. The void is uncomfortable because the mind wants certainty. It wants labels. It wants timelines. It wants reassurance that something is happening. But rebirth does not offer explanations up front. It offers silence. And silence feels threatening to an identity that learned to survive through effort, noise, and constant self-definition. This is why so many people misinterpret this phase as losing direction, when in truth, direction is being recalibrated at a level deeper than thought. If you feel less reactive, less attached, less interested in explaining yourself, that is not withdrawal, that is coherence forming. If old fears no longer hook you the same way, but new clarity has not fully arrived, that is not confusion. That is the old identity dissolving faster than the new one can stabilize. What feels like nothing happening is actually everything reorganizing beneath perception. A quantum rebirth does not ask you to become someone new. It asks you to stop performing who you are not. That is why it begins with stillness. The field must clear before it can lock into a new signal. The nervous system must release vigilance before it can trust expansion. The mind must loosen its grip on identity before awareness can reorganize around truth. Forcing clarity right now will only create resistance. Rebirth cannot be rushed, not because it is slow, but because it is precise. The universe is not experimenting with you. It is recalibrating you. And recalibration feels subtle, internal, and almost invisible at first. You will not see fireworks. You will feel space. You will not hear instructions. You will sense a quiet internal enough of old cycles, old compromises, old versions of yourself that no longer fit. When rebirth begins, reality has not stalled. It has paused for accuracy. The field is waiting for your identity to fully release what it has outgrown, so it can reorganize around what is emerging. That is why so many people feel as if they are standing at a threshold right now. Not moving forward, not moving backward, just standing. That standing is not inactivity, it is integration. And if you are feeling this, you are not alone. But you are early. Not everyone senses a rebirth before it becomes visible. Those who do are often the ones whose identity shifts first, long before circumstances follow. 2026 does not initiate this rebirth. It exposes it. What is unfolding did not begin with a calendar shift. It began the moment your internal structure could no longer sustain the old frequency you were living inside. The year itself is not the cause. It is the mirror. What you are sensing about 2026 has very little to do with time. It has everything to do with frequency. The human mind is trained to treat years like checkpoints, as if life resets when numbers change. But reality does not reorganize itself according to dates. It reorganizes itself according to coherence. When coherence reaches a certain intensity, entire timelines begin to restructure. Not suddenly, not visibly, but with precision long before the external world confirms what has already shifted internally. This is why 2026 already feels present. Not emotionally, energetically. You are not waiting for it. You are already resonating with it. In quantum terms, the future is not something you walk toward. It is something you synchronize with. When enough internal conditions align, the nervous system, the brain, and the energetic field begin to stabilize around a new baseline. That baseline does not feel like excitement. It feels like inevitability, like a quiet knowing that no longer asks for permission from doubt. From a scientific perspective, this mirrors what happens when complex systems undergo a phase transition. A system can absorb change for a long time without visible difference. Then, at a precise threshold, its entire structure reorganizes at once. Consciousness works the same way. Identity evolves gradually, but transformation occurs when accumulation turns into coherence. 2026 represents that threshold, not because of symbolism, but because a long process of recalibration has been building beneath awareness for years. Neuroscience reflects this clearly. Long-term identity change does not emerge from motivation or intensity. It emerges through disengagement, through the quiet weakening of outdated reward loops, through the strengthening of neural pathways that support a more integrated sense of self. This is why many people are experiencing a loss of interest in old pursuits, old definitions of success, old emotional reactions, not because something is wrong, but because the brain is conserving energy. It is preparing to stabilize a more coherent identity. Spiritually, this phase has never been considered a beginning. It has always been understood as a passage. Ancient traditions did not mark rebirth by dates alone. They marked it by readiness. Readiness does not feel like excitement. It feels like clarity without explanation, a sense of alignment that does not require logic to validate it. When readiness appears, time becomes secondary. The field responds immediately, even if physical change unfolds gradually. This is why 2026 feels different from other turning points in your life. Those changes were initiated by effort. This one is initiating you. You are not selecting a new path. The path is recognizing you. That distinction matters. Conscious change demands control. Quantum change requires availability. The more you attempt to define what is coming, the more resistance you generate. At this level, the field does not respond to strategy. It responds to openness. Availability means your identity is no longer gripping what it has outgrown. It means your nervous system can remain steady without certainty. It means the mind is loosening control in favor of coherence. This is not passive, it is deeply intelligent. The body senses when a higher frequency identity is approaching, and it begins releasing whatever would prevent it from being sustained. This is why forcing goals right now feels draining, why certain ambitions feel empty even if they once fueled you. Why intuition feels louder than logic. You are not losing direction. You are exiting an outdated frequency. And when an old frequency collapses, space opens for a new one to stabilize. 2026 is not arriving to disrupt your life. It is arriving to confirm a shift that is already underway. It feels inevitable because, energetically, it is. The field has adjusted. Your consciousness has begun recalibrating. What remains is integration. This is where many people struggle. They sense the change, then rush clarity. They demand certainty before coherence has stabilized. They try to name what is still forming. But rebirth does not respond to interrogation. It responds to permission. Permission to let the old identity dissolve without immediately replacing it. Permission to exist in transition without interpreting it as failure or delay. If you allow this frequency to integrate naturally, something subtle will begin to happen. Life will respond to you differently. Less friction, more precision, fewer forced decisions, more intuitive alignment. Reality will feel less reactive and more responsive, not because you are doing more, but because you are finally operating from a frequency that matches where the field is already moving. And this is only the beginning. Before a new identity can fully appear, the old one must fade. Not dramatically, but quietly. Every rebirth begins with a disappearance, the slow withdrawal of energy from an identity that no longer receives it. This is the phase most people fear, and the one they understand the least. Many people misunderstand rebirth because they believe it means becoming someone new. In reality, it begins when you are no longer able to continue being who you were. This phase rarely feels empowering at the start. It feels neutral, undefined, as if the internal momentum that once carried you forward has quietly powered down. Not because you failed, not because you lost purpose, but because an identity built for a previous frequency can no longer operate where you are now. This is not regression. It is not delay. It is not you falling behind. It is the quantum collapse of an identity that your current state can no longer sustain. The field responds first to absence, to what you stop feeding with attention, emotion, and effort. When an old version of you loses coherence, the probabilities connected to that version dissolve. Relationships subtly reconfigure. Motivations soften. Old fears no longer command the same urgency. Even desires that once pulled you forward begin to feel distant, almost irrelevant. Not because something is missing, but because something has finished. Neurologically, this stage is marked by disengagement from outdated reward systems. The brain no longer receives the same chemical reinforcement from achievement, validation, or familiar struggle. What once felt motivating now feels strangely empty. This can be unsettling. The mind equates stimulation with meaning. So when stimulation fades, it assumes meaning is disappearing. But meaning is not dissolving. It is being rewritten beneath awareness. The brain is conserving energy, redirecting it towards stabilizing an identity that has not fully formed yet. An identity that cannot be rushed into existence. Spiritually, this phase has always been described as a kind of death, not physical, symbolic. The ego begins releasing roles it once needed to survive. Self-image loosens its grip. You stop explaining yourself the way you used to. You stop engaging in conflicts that once felt necessary. You stop reacting to life with the same reflexes. This is often mistaken for apathy, but it is not numbness. It is neutrality. It is the nervous system exiting survival mode and preparing for coherence. This is why the stage can feel lonely even when nothing has changed externally. You are no longer resonating with the frequency of your old environment, but the new environment has not fully assembled yet. You are between timelines. And in that space, the mind wants to rush. It wants labels. It wants certainty. It wants to immediately replace the old identity with something familiar. But quantum rebirth does not allow shortcuts. If the old identity has not completed its dissolution, the new one cannot stabilize. Any attempt to force reinvention here simply recreates the past under a different name. The field is precise. It waits for completion before expansion, and completion requires stillness. This is why doing nothing right now can feel strangely productive. Even if the mind resists it, your consciousness is withdrawing energy from outdated structures, so reality can reorganize around what is emerging. The more you cling to the old self for certainty, the longer the transition feels. The moment you allow the old identity to dissolve without panic, the rebirth accelerates naturally. This is where many people turn back. They mistake the void for failure. They assume something went wrong. They return to old patterns not because those patterns are aligned, but because they are familiar. But those who stay, those who allow the identity death to complete, emerge with a level of clarity that cannot be manufactured. The new self does not arrive as an idea. It arrives as a state, a way of moving through life that feels grounded, calm, precise, undeniably true. If you are experiencing emotional flatness mixed with sudden moments of clarity or detachment paired with deep inner knowing, this is why. The old self is no longer running the system, but the new one has not fully taken the controls yet. You are not lost. You are unoccupied. And that openness is exactly what allows the quantum field to recalibrate your trajectory without interference. Nothing real is being taken from you. Everything dissolving was sustained by a version of you that you have already outgrown. The field is not stripping you, it is unburdening you. And the space that feels uncomfortable now is the same space that will soon hold a more coherent, powerful, and authentic expression of your life. Rebirth is not about construction, it is about remembrance. The mind believes change requires addition, new habits, new goals, new labels. But the quantum field does not respond to what you add. It responds to what you release. It responds to what you uncover, not what you attempt to build. What you are moving through right now is not the creation of a new self. It is the gradual removal of layers that were never truly aligned with who you are. This is why the rebirth feels quiet. Truth does not demand force. It settles into place. It stabilizes naturally. As the old identity dissolves, the new one does not arrive through effort. It arrives through recognition. There is a subtle sense of this feels right. Not urgent, not dramatic. A clarity that does not need explanation. A grounded presence that remains steady regardless of what is happening around you. This is the mark of remembrance. It is the moment consciousness realigns with a version of you that existed before conditioning, before survival strategies, before learning how to perform in order to feel safe. From a quantum perspective, remembrance is coherence. It is when your internal signal becomes whole again. No longer fragmented, no longer competing with itself. When you stop broadcasting divided identities, the field responds with precision. Life begins reorganizing around simplicity rather than struggle. Choices feel clearer, not because you know more, but because you are no longer internally conflicted. Movement feels natural instead of forced. Rest feels valid instead of earned. Creation flows from alignment rather than pressure. Spiritually, this stage has always been honored through anchoring, not to create change, but to hold it. This is where many rebirths quietly dissolve, not because the shift was false, but because it was not stabilized. Life accelerates again. Old environments resurface. External demands increase. And without integration, the nervous system returns to familiar patterns. The rebirth fades not because it lacked truth, but because it lacked embodiment. This is why rebirth is not sustained by motivation. It is sustained by practice, a way of returning to coherence, a way of remaining present with subtle internal shifts, a way of allowing awareness to stay embodied even as life becomes louder. Writing, reflection, and symbolic awareness have always served this purpose, not as rituals to change reality, but as mirrors that help consciousness remain aligned. When awareness is anchored, identity stabilizes. When identity stabilizes, reality no longer needs to correct you through friction. A rebirth that is not integrated becomes a memory. A rebirth that is integrated becomes a new baseline. And this is what makes this moment different. You are not being asked to awaken. That has already begun. You are being asked to remain present with who you are becoming, to allow the frequency you are stabilizing to move with you into daily life, without abandoning it when uncertainty returns, without replacing it with old reflexes. The most important question now is not what comes next. It is, how do you stay with this? How do you move through ordinary days without losing the clarity you have touched? How do you let subtle awareness become lived presence? How do you continue remembering who you are when the noise returns? This is where rebirth becomes real, not as an experience, but as a way of being. And this is only the beginning. This is not about manifesting more outcomes. It is about becoming stable in who you are becoming. So reality can reorganize around you without resistance, not through effort, not through control, but through coherence. This phase exists for moments like this, when you are no longer who you were, but not yet fully embodied as who you are. It is a threshold state, a quiet middle ground where identity is settling into truth rather than performance. If this rebirth feels familiar rather than exciting, if it feels calm instead of dramatic, if it feels steady rather than urgent, that is not a lack of momentum. That is alignment stabilizing. You do not need to rush this moment. There is nothing to chase, nothing to force. Simply remain present with what is unfolding internally. Let awareness stay with the shift instead of trying to direct it. You are not attempting to change your life. Your life is already changing. What is happening now is simpler and deeper than action. You are learning how to hold the frequency you have accessed, so it does not disappear when the world grows louder again. This is how rebirth completes, not by becoming something else, but by remaining with what has already emerged. And when you can hold it, reality follows.